They say that you are with me or you are dead. These people have, they have been told already to kill the people. I told you, I have got evidence, of the people who are killed yesterday. These people, they've taken already the order and they are killing. They have missionaries as well. They are being used, in some spots in Tripoli. I don't know. I don't know who he's fooling. He's fooling the Libyan people or pressuring communities. I don't know who's actually fooling. But believe me, I've been, I participated in a number of events, and every time I participated in an event, they were shooting using, aircraft machine guns and Kalashnikovs and, tear gases. This is something standard. Everybody knows about in Libya.
Okay, well, what do you and other protesters plan to do now?
The people are really, really very upset in Libya. They are upset with the support, that he got, over the years from Britain, from Italy, and also from America. And they are not going to give up. They're going to carry on. We got, our country and our religion and everything, it's worth giving our blood for. So we're not going to stop. I've got my, 3 sons are with me. And I will be very, very brave, man, if my sons, they die as a shahid. So we are carrying on. We're not going to stop. Of course, we are not armed people. We don't have no arm at all. And we're facing, very sophisticated machines, which are being supplied. Can you tell me really what we can do in a situation like this?
So
we are trying to use the internet to send messages to, everywhere. But this is, the maximum we can do at the moment.
All right, Abu Yusuf, live from Libya near Tripoli. Thank you indeed for talking to us. Let's just recap a number of the points that we've been hearing over the past few hours. Libya's longtime ruler, Muammar Gaddafi, made another defiant address to his people on Friday night. He vowed he will not step down, despite what appears to be growing support for anti-government protesters, both at home and abroad. There's now been a call for concrete action by the UN's chief. Meanwhile, its most powerful body, the Security Council, is also expected to finalise a package of sanctions against Gaddafi and his entourage on Saturday. All this coming after Gaddafi joined his supporters in the capital. He told them he will not step down from office and he will fight to the end. But the implications of those vows were also seen on the streets of Tripoli. Protesters were fired upon after another crackdown began in the city after Friday prayers. We've been hearing throughout the day from people who were there talking about ammunition being used and shoot-to-kill orders clearly in operation. Meanwhile, in Zawiya, about 50 kilometers away from Tripoli, this amateur video was sent to us, appearing to show more soldiers switching sides and joining the protesters. With me is Tariq Youssef, Senior Research Fellow at the Dubai School of Government. Thank you once again for being with us.
Pleasure.
Now, you've been with us for the past few days and monitoring all this stuff that's been going on. You heard us talking to Abu Yusuf there. Is his account of events tallying with what you're hearing from people inside Libya?
Very much consistent with what reports we received yesterday, around the time when protesters were out on the streets. There was gunfire, several people were killed. Reports also of homes being searched. We had 1 or 2 Libyans with us yesterday in the studio who were describing a state of fear by men and women, the elderly, in their homes in Tripoli.
And yet we saw last night Gaddafi appearing in public, which, just the fact that he felt safe enough to appear in public in Tripoli must have been a significant fact in itself, and we saw what seemed like a sizable crowd. It seems that he does have a degree of support.
I don't doubt that he has some degree of support in Tripoli, barricading himself within a city where he has also elite forces, military, mercenaries. They've had a couple of days to also bring in people from the south of Libya, parts of the east of Libya, city of Sirte. But the crowds were distinctly smaller than what we are used to seeing in Libya. Green Square tends to typically accommodate upwards of 100,000. Yesterday we probably saw 10, 15,000, and we didn't know exactly where these supporters were drawn from. His own Libya's own former UN envoy indicated that these were army officers dressed up in civilians. Some students were bussed in, and that is what made up the crowds that we saw in Green Square yesterday.
It's an almost surreal situation where we see this constant hemorrhaging of some of his closest aides and a number of peripheral figures in the regime, all of them turning around and saying, we not only support the protesters, but we support their account of what is going on. And yet we have the surreal sight of Gaddafi's son appearing on state television saying, come and take a look for yourselves, there's nothing going on here.
Saif al-Islam, who was presented just a few years ago as the enlightened side of Gaddafi's regime, the so-called reformist, is now aligned himself extremely closely with his dad. He essentially is defending his dad's rule, and by extension his own rule, his own hopes to be a future leader of Libya. That must be a source of great disappointment by people outside of Libya who supported SAFE, typically Westerners, companies, governments, but especially within Libya by the youth who thought perhaps SAFE could be the person who helped steer Libya in a different direction after his dad steps down.
So what are the sanctions then? We've, puzzlingly enough, I mean, the kind of sanctions that people have been talking about for the past week are only just being discussed as potential and possible definite actions in the UN and by Washington. Why is it taking them so long, for one? And two, is what they're proposing likely to have any effect?
Psychological effect, real effect, should this crisis persist for a while. The international community has been playing catch-up. We saw in the last 2 days, however, an escalation in their response. My view is that the evacuation of foreign nationals, especially Western nationals, is going to be a significant point that will allow the Obama administration and Western powers to essentially look at all the options as they indicated, including perhaps some quasi-military or military options to deal with this regime. That's what's going to happen in the next couple of days after all the Western nationals have been evacuated. That's what we saw incidentally after Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. Western nationals had to be evacuated, and then came a robust international response.
All right, Tariq Youssef, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Now, within the last couple of hours, we have managed to speak to someone else in Libya itself. Youssef is in the city of Al-Baida in the east of the country, and he describes himself as independent, and this is what he had to tell us.
The entire eastern provinces are under the control of the revolutionaries, and they have been joined by elements from the police as well as the armed forces. And we are gaining momentum. We have formed committees to run the daily affairs of life, including necessary aid for the injured and supplies. The youth are staying up all night to provide protection for civilians. The protesters are planning to march on the capital now, but these things are being taken care of secretly because the roads leading to Tripoli are not entirely safe. They are safe up to a certain point, and the regime still controls a large segment of that road. And they carry out inspections and searches. The Al-Saidi battalion on the coastal road seems to carry out thorough inspections, so the entire eastern provinces will be on the march to liberate the western side of the country. This is taking place secretly with the help of the army and police.
We'll turn away from Libya for a while and bring you some other news going on around the world. In Iraq, an attack has taken place on the country's largest oil refinery. Officials say unknown gunmen burst into the Beiji plant, 180 kilometers north of Baghdad. They shot dead some of the staff and planted bombs in the facility. Jane Arafa is live in Baghdad with more on this. Jane, tell us a bit more about this event.
Well, it was obviously a very carefully planned attack, and the key here seems to be that these unknown gunmen managed to infiltrate the facility, something that's obviously extremely worrying to the employees and the managers at the Beiji refinery. It is the biggest refinery in Iraq. It's not the oil fields, it's not the oil pipelines, which are the ones that normally get attacked, where foreign investors are most concerned about, but it does have a serious impact on domestic consumption and on confidence here. As you mentioned, it was gunmen at 4:30 in the morning who entered the facility, laid bombs, and as they were leaving, apparently started shooting. There's one engineer dead of smoke inhalation and a technician killed by gunfire. All of this done with silencers, again indicating that this was a very carefully planned, well-executed attack.
And obviously well-researched, Jane. It would suggest that there are insiders there planning to disrupt the internal politics. As you say, it's for domestic. This plant is for domestic use. So does this raise fresh questions about the unity of the political situation there?
It does, and there isn't a whole lot of unity in the political situation. Really what it raises questions about is, can these major installations be kept safe? This is a facility which is a key part of Iraq's ability to sustain itself, to maintain public confidence, and to attract investment. It's protected by a special unit that's attached to the Ministry of the Interior, and there are so many different security services that they don't always all work together. Some of them answer directly to the Prime Minister, some of them answer to people who it's not quite clear to, and at the end of the day, it seems to create significant gaps in security. Certainly, the deputy manager of the refinery we spoke with says that it's a major concern to them. They're not only assessing the damage, they're evaluating how exactly that could have happened and how to be able to convince people who work there that it's safe to come back to work.
Well, as you say, the political situation is not unified at all, really, Jane, and we saw protests yesterday. Tell us a little bit about what happened yesterday and what it adds up to.
Well, yesterday was kind of a continuation that can't really be separated from anything else, including this attack. The impact of this attack on the refinery will probably be a shortage of gasoline and kerosene. And what's been driving people out in the streets in Baghdad, Fallujah, and Basra is the sense that they don't have basic services and they can't rely on their government. Some of these protests have turned violent. In Baghdad, there were no people reported killed, but certainly for the size of the demonstration, given that there was a total car ban imposed, it was quite impressive in terms of the ability of people and their desire to come out and demand that they get more from their government. And that is something that's obviously sweeping the region and sweeping Iraq as well.
All right, Jane Araf, live in Baghdad. Thanks, Jane. Now, exit polls in Ireland indicating the ruling party, Fianna Fáil, has suffered a huge defeat in the general election. The polls show the main opposition party is now on course to lead the next government, but without an overall majority. It's likely to get just over 36% of the vote, according to early estimates. The counting is expected to begin fairly shortly. Police in New Zealand say the death toll from Tuesday's earthquake has now risen to 145, with more than 200 people still missing. That number's expected to rise further. Search teams from 6 countries are now in New Zealand helping the local rescuers, but no survivors have been found since Wednesday. Violent aftershocks are continuing to hit the city of Christchurch. Andrew Thomas is there.
Well, a high death toll already, but one that looks likely to rise as more and more bodies are pulled from the rubble. No survivors have now been found for more than 3 days, and the prospects of that now vanishingly small. A flutter of excitement on Saturday when rescuers thought they heard some sound underneath the rubble, only for a cat to run out. Nobody alive under there. As well as the big clean-up that's trying to go on in town, a massive clean-up operation is also going on in the suburbs, where silt that rose up through the earth when the earthquake hit has to be cleaned up. They call that liquefaction, and they compare it to putting your foot down on a beach and watching the water rise up around it. That water has brought up huge amounts of silt and mud, and that mud needs to be cleared, and it's a huge, huge job. In some cases, the mud is way